Hello, everybody. I have an update. There's so much happening, but I think I will start with something that happened a couple of years ago, which some of you may remember. My friend and fellow LaRouche candidate in New York, Jose Vega, had a little encounter with the woman who has undemocratically become the Democratic Party nominee for US president as a result of Joe Biden or someone who looks like Joe Biden's withdrawal from the race and endorsing her. So let me just show you this and we'll discuss it. Here we go.
So let's make it work for working families. And right now, the president and I are working to that end with the United States Congress to pass our Build Back Better agenda. And I'm sure you all have heard about the Build Back Better agenda. In my briefing documents, it usually says BBB. But some have been asking, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, it's about being better on climate. It's about better health. It's about better jobs. And intentionally, it is about our families.
What about the families who drowned? 8 families drowned here in Queens. It could have been prevented if we had the right infrastructure.
You are right, brother.
I am right about that.
You are.
And the Chinese have shown that poverty is a choice.
So
why aren't we working with the Chinese on their Belt and Road Initiative?
Okay,
the bankers run a dictatorship here. We need to pass Glass-Steagall back.
But right now, let's talk about the agenda.
No, the agenda doesn't address the fact that people are going to die if there's another hurricane. There's been planned shrinkage of benign neglect.
In our democracy, everybody gets their chance to talk, and everybody gets a chance to be heard.
You don't need half energy.
This is our agenda.
This is our agenda. It sure is. Goodness. So what was Jose talking about? People may remember in Woodside, Queens, when there was a particularly heavy rainstorm, Ida, I think it was, 9 people or 13 people drowned in their basements. And then you had all these politicians flocking to Queens saying, oh, it's climate change. It wasn't climate change. What I learned by going there is that the Army Corps of Engineers already in 1976, let's see, that's 48 years ago now, then it was 46 years ago, had determined that that neighborhood needed its own dedicated sewer line. That neighborhood at the time had 50,000 people living in it. Now it has 150,000 people living in it, and they never built the sewer line, and they are not building it now. And in fact, all that happened was that people who lived there who didn't drown in their basements got checks from FEMA that didn't cover 1/10 of what they needed. And then they were told if they wanted to continue to live there, they have to buy expensive insurance. And furthermore, if they want to actually clean out the sewer lines and the drainage, that's their own business. The city's not going to pay for it. Okay, that's Kamala Harris, that's Build Back Better. That's what Jose was complaining about. Now, usefully, he brought up China because China, in this gaping absence of leadership from the United States, the fact that we don't seem to exactly have a president right now, and I'll get to that later, China has stepped forward, and first they hosted a meeting of not only Fatah and Hamas, but a Palestinian delegation of 14 different groups. One of the reasons why Bibi Netanyahu kept funding Hamas is he said, we don't want a unified Palestinian state, so we're going to support Hamas, which he did for many years with tens of millions of dollars. Well, if Hamas gets absorbed in a unified group that wants to develop their nation, you suddenly have the basis for a viable Palestinian state, and you have the basis for the two-state solution that the hypocrite Joe Biden kept talking about, but he refused to recognize, and a basis to get peace on an equitable basis. So this was major, not much covered in the US. The other development is Dmitry Kuleba, who's the foreign minister for Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, although not the legitimate president because he canceled elections, just went to China. And this follows the amazing peacemaking trip of the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who went to meet with Zelensky. Then he met with Putin. Then he met with Xi Jinping. Then he came to the United States for the NATO summit, and he met with Donald Trump just before the attempted assassination of Trump. And what Orban is working on is to come to a negotiated end to the Ukraine-Russia war, because if we keep pushing and provoking, Russia is going to respond. They are not bluffing, as the British have said, and it's extremely dangerous. Plus, you have lunatics like Macron, the president of France, calling for sending ground troops. And we had at NATO, Biden saying that the US will now send nuclear-capable F-16s to Ukraine for use in Russia. And of course, Russia will have to respond to that. So there are grown-ups trying to chill this out. And I think it's very interesting that it may be dawning on the Ukrainians that without Joe Biden in the White House, they're not going to get any more money. And maybe they should try and get whatever kind of deal they can, which would allow their nation to rebuild, save some face, save some territory. And that's what's under discussion. So I think that's very significant. And it's excellent China is doing this. Now, if the United States were a functional nation, we would be doing this. One of the reasons why so many people are determined to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president is he has expressed an intention to end that war, that he would be willing to speak with these people, Putin and Zelensky. You also have Robert Kennedy Jr., who has been rather truthful about the causes of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. But the United States is in a total existential crisis because our nation is a presidency, and our president is clearly not functional and really not there, as best we can tell. I was on an interview with a South African television station today, and the reporter asked me if I thought that the Joe Biden who was seen at the White House after he supposedly recovered from COVID was actually Joe Biden. Now, I don't know. I have no way of knowing, but what does it mean that people in other countries think that the actual Joe Biden may be an imposter, maybe someone wearing a rubber mask? Think about how we look to the world. And thank God that the grown-ups, senior statesmen like Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and others are taking some leadership right now to chill out the situation. Now, the Democratic Party, this is unbelievable, actually, because Biden gives us this peculiar announcement over X that he's stepping down. Then he gives this very disassociated speech from the White House, which I printed out because I couldn't really believe that he said these things. And they left out the part about how we're not at war. I guess they realized that was a bit much for everybody. But he says that he's stepping down for the sake of democracy, that the Democratic Party was divided, and so he's leaving for the sake of democracy. So he's so democratic that he's endorsed Kamala Harris, even though people have questions about his mental functioning. They've all decided to go along with that. And we're told that hundreds of millions of dollars have flooded into her campaign. Now, a lot of that money was money that was being withheld as long as Biden was there. And there are lawsuits being filed because it's not entirely clear that it's legal for all that money to go to Kamala Harris. But since when did the Biden administration or the Democratic Party ever care about whether something was legal. After all, they make the rules. So he went on to say that he's done so much for our country. We're having a spectacular recovery. He said that he's also secured the border, another laughable comment. And I'm just wondering why more people, Democrats, aren't a little bit upset that you are being given a candidate for whom none of you voted. Her name wasn't on the ballot, and they're having electronic voting because they don't want to have an open convention. God forbid you would have freedom of speech and association, and people think they could nominate someone else at the Democratic convention. So that has to be locked down before they get there. And Biden, by the way, said in his little remarks that he has to uphold free speech. So this is really insane. I think it's very dangerous. I think there may be more actions ahead to destabilize our nation. And I would like to remind listeners, as I reminded people when I was interviewed by Kim Iverson a couple days ago, that in 2019, Mark Carney, who was the head of the Bank of England at the time, told a gathering of central bankers at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, that we need regime change, that you cannot allow governments to run their countries, that you need central banks to run the country, and we need a global digital currency. And I guess the presidency of the United States might get in the way of that. So I don't think it's a coincidence exactly that we had this attempt on former President Donald Trump's life. And then a week later, Biden is announcing he's not running. It leaves us wondering who is running the country and why is Biden fit to serve for one more minute. And then on top of that, or during this vacuum, you have Bibi Netanyahu coming to Washington to speak before the Congress. And I just wanted to share one other little thing with you, which is something that happened at his speech, which many of you may not be aware of. I know that you saw that there were anti-genocide protesters, pro-Palestine protesters, a few, maybe three FBI agents or others among them did stupid things like burning an American flag, which I absolutely do not endorse. But they're right, it is genocide, and Bibi doesn't care about the hostages. And I just want to show you something, because there were some arrests made outside his speech. And who were arrested? 6 people who are family members of the hostages. And they were arrested because they were wearing bright yellow t-shirts that said "seal the deal," because they want a deal. They want, one of them said, some of us wore a t-shirt calling on our prime minister to finally seal that deal. And for that, we were removed from the visitors gallery. So just as the family members of the hostages are being treated very badly in Israel because they are demanding that a deal be reached and their family members be released, they were arrested in the United States. So perhaps Bibi Netanyahu and Joe Biden have the same idea of democracy. I believe our nation can and must do better, and that depends on you, the American people, calling your representatives. If they were not boycotting the speech of Netanyahu, you should find out why. Why was he invited? Why was he allowed to come here? Why are we not working to end that war, to get the hostages released and to stop the genocide? Why is our government not supporting a Palestinian state when we claim we are for a two-state solution? But on the bigger picture, our nation was the first nation to have a revolution against the British Empire. And Lyndon LaRouche always said, in any crisis, the way to get through the crisis is to remind Americans of our identity as Ben Franklin, John Quincy Adams, Alexander Hamilton, as our nation was intended to become, a beacon of hope, a temple of liberty, not a dumb giant following the orders of the British Empire. I'm Diane Sayre LaRouche, independent candidate for U.S. Senate.